My name is Theodore Beaumont. I am 71 years old, a retired civil engineer, and a widower. Last week my son-in-law called me. He didn't ask how I was. He informed me that he and 14 of his friends were 50 minutes away from my $3 million oceanfront villa. He told me to hurry up and prepare beds, food, and towels for their 3-week stay. He called me old man. I smiled, told him I'd get everything ready for his arrival, and hung up the phone. He thought he was walking into a free luxury resort. He had no idea I was about to teach him a lesson in the one thing I've spent my life mastering: structural integrity. Before I tell you how I turned my architectural skills into a blueprint for revenge. Please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I want to know just how far this lesson in respect travels. The line went dead, but the silence in its place was louder than his shouting. I didn't get angry. Anger is a luxury for men without a plan, and I, a man who spent 45 years designing bridges and skyscrapers from nothing, always have a plan. I walked into the living room, the quiet of the sprawling villa wrapping around me like a shroud. Kyle mistakes my silence for weakness. He's wrong. My silence is where I think. It is my boardroom. I went to the mahogany bar, not for a stiff drink, but for a simple glass of water. My hand was perfectly steady. The cool glass in my palm was the perfect contrast to the slow-burning fire in my chest. I had endured enough. This was not a spontaneous outburst. This was a calculated breaking point. I walked through the rooms, the pristine white walls reflecting the golden afternoon sun. My hand glided over the linen sofa, the cool marble of the coffee table. Everything in this house was chosen by me and Amani, my late wife. Everything had a story. And none of those stories had room for a man like Kyle Miller. You're getting old, Theo. You should be investing in something more practical than a vacation home, he'd said last Christmas right after I announced the purchase. He said it with a wide grin, as if it were a friendly joke, but his eyes weren't smiling. His eyes were scanning my main house in Atlanta, appraising every piece of furniture, calculating its worth. Do you know how much I'm paying in student loan interest? He'd whined last month, just before borrowing $5,000 for what he called an inheritance advance. I knew the money was for a ski trip to Aspen with his buddies. I gave it to him anyway. For Amara. It was always for my daughter. And then there were the little comments, seemingly harmless, but laced with the poison of casual racism. Times have really changed, haven't they, Theo? A guy like you being able to afford a place like this? America is amazing. And he said it as if my success was a fluke, a gift from society, and not the result of calloused hands and a mind that hadn't stopped working for half a century. He, a mediocre salesman with a spotty track record, dared to say that to me, the lead engineer who had overseen the construction of the 3 largest bridges in the state of Georgia. That condescension, that's what I hated most. He didn't just disrespect me, he disrespected my entire journey. He looked at me and didn't see a man who had fought through prejudice, who had to work twice as hard for half the recognition of his white colleagues. He saw a walking checkbook, a lonely old man he could easily manipulate. I took a sip of water. Its clean taste helped to bank the fire of my rage. Anger is a useless emotion. It clouds judgment. What I needed now was clarity, precision. I pulled out my phone and opened the Notes app. I began to list out tasks. Each bullet point was a brick in the wall I was about to build around Kyle. He thought he could barge in here like a hurricane I would show him. I am the man who designs structures to withstand Category 5 storms. He was barely a gust of wind. My feet carried me to my study, the place where I keep what is most precious, not the engineering awards or the plaques of recognition. On the wall opposite my desk hangs a large portrait of Amani, my wife. The photo was taken on our 40th wedding anniversary, just 6 months before she left me. She's smiling in the picture, a radiant smile that could light up the darkest room. Her eyes sparkle with intelligence, warmth, and a resilient strength that had been my guide through the hardest years. We dreamed of this house together. I remembered a late evening years ago when we were young and living in a cramped rental apartment in Atlanta. Amara was just a baby. We had driven through the night to visit Hilton Head for the first time, just to see the ocean. We sat on the sand under a sky full of stars, and Amani rested her head on my shoulder. "Someday, Theo," she had whispered, "we'll have a house here, a place where our grandchildren can run on the sand, a place for our family to gather, a place of peace." It wasn't a dream of wealth, it was a dream of legacy, of building something that would last for generations. a sanctuary. That promise became my driving force. Even after she was gone, it echoed in my heart. Every extra hour at the office, every shrewd investment was all for that goal. This villa was not a symbol of my success. It was a monument to our love. And now Kyle Miller, with his dirty shoes and his pack of boorish friends, was planning to turn this monument into his personal 3-week frat house. They were going to turn this sacred sanctuary into a playground for their selfishness and arrogance. This insult was not just against me, it was against Amani's memory. I looked into her eyes in the portrait. "I'm sorry, my love," I whispered. "I've let this go on for too long. I've been too soft for Amara's sake." I had thought that providing for Kyle, that tolerating his words and actions was the way to keep my daughter happy, to keep her little family stable. I was wrong. My silence wasn't peace, it was permission. I had allowed this cancer to grow, and now it was threatening to destroy the foundation of everything Amani and I had built together. "But you know me, Amani," I continued, a steely resolve hardening in my chest. "When I build something, I build it to last. It's time to do some foundation maintenance." I knew I had to make this call, as difficult as it would be. I returned to the living room, sat down, and dialed Amara's number. She picked up on the third ring. "Dad." Her voice sounded surprised and a little nervous. "Amara," I said, keeping my own voice perfectly even. "Kyle just called me." A long pause stretched on the other end of the line. In that silence, I heard everything. I heard the guilt. I heard the helplessness. Oh, she finally said a single word that contained a whole story. "He says that he and 14 of his friends are on their way here to stay for 3 weeks. I continued, not as an accusation, but as a statement of fact. "Did you know about this plan, Amara?" Another pause. This one even heavier. I could picture her biting her lips, searching for a harmless lie, a way to placate both sides. That was always Amara's role in the family, the peacekeeper. But sometimes peace is just another word for avoidance. "Dad, I knew he was inviting a few friends," she stammered. "But I didn't think, not that many. And for 3 weeks. You didn't think, or you chose not to ask." My voice sharpened slightly, though I tried to control it. "Dad, Kyle is just... He's excited about your house. He wanted to show it off to his friends." "Show it off," I interrupted. "Amara, this is not a toy. This is my home. It's your mother's legacy, and your husband is treating it like a free motel." "I'm sorry, Dad. I'll talk to him." Her voice was trembling. I took a deep breath. It was too late for talking. Action was required. "There's no need, sweetheart. I just wanted to know where you stood." The question hung in the air between us. I had given her a chance to stand with me, to show respect for her own family. Her silence was the answer. She had chosen her husband, or rather, she had chosen the path of least resistance. I felt a deep pang of sadness, but it was quickly replaced by resolve. I could not rely on her to defend her own boundaries, so I would have to do it for both of us. "It's all right, sweetheart," I said, my voice calm again. "You just leave it to me. I'll handle it." I ended the call before she could reply. The conversation had confirmed what I needed to know. I was on my own in this, not just to teach Kyle a lesson, but to show Amara that self-respect is not negotiable. My phone felt heavy in my hand, but my purpose was light. There was only one person I needed to call, not for sympathy, not for advice, but for execution. There was only one man I trusted to understand the difference between a legal document and a weapon. Reginald Carter. Reggie. We had met as two of only a handful of black students in the entire engineering program at Georgia Tech back in the 50s. He'd switched to law after our second year, joking that it was easier to argue with a judge than with the laws of physics. For 50 years he had been my lawyer, my confidant, and my brother in all but blood. He had been there when I started my firm. He had been a pallbearer at Amani's funeral, and he was the executor of my will. He didn't need long explanations. He just needed the objective. I found his number and pressed the call button. He answered on the second ring, his voice as steady and reassuring as it had been 5 decades ago. "Theo." I was just pouring my first coffee. "Don't tell me you're already up solving the world's infrastructure problems." I allowed myself a small, genuine smile. "Not the world's, Reggie. Just a small infestation problem at my new property." Reggie went quiet for a beat. He caught the seriousness in my tone immediately. "All right. I'm listening." His voice was all business now. "I need a legal document," I said, walking over to my desk and looking out at the calm blue ocean. "A short-term rental agreement." The kind you'd use for a minimal service tenancy. I want it airtight. I could hear the faint sound of him typing on his keyboard. Okay, standard template, or do you need specific clauses? Specific, I said. Very specific. I want clauses covering sanitation services, specifically the use of external facilities if provided. I want a significant security deposit required for excessive noise complaints. And I want a clause that outlines clear personal liability for any and all damages to the property or its contents, effective immediately upon arrival of the tenants. Make the penalty for non-compliance immediate eviction by a third-party security service. Reggie didn't ask why I needed a rental agreement for my own villa. He didn't ask who the tenants were. He processed the information, his legal mind connecting the dots I had laid out. There was a pause, and then I heard him chuckle a low, dry sound. Sounds like you're expecting some difficult tenants, Theo. You could say that, I replied, the corner of my mouth twitching upwards. I'm expecting a party of 15, mostly hostile. Their leader thinks he has squatters' rights. 15. Reggie whistled softly. You always did believe in going big. You need this in writing, I assume, e-signature ready. Of course. Send it to my secure email. How quickly can you get it to me? Give me 30 minutes, he said, the sound of his typing becoming faster. It'll be in your inbox, locked and loaded. Anything else, my friend? Do you need me to recommend a good security service to enforce that eviction clause? I considered it for a moment. Not yet, Reggie. Phase 1 is deterrence. Phase 2 will require enforcement. I'll keep you posted. You do that, Theo, and let me know if you need someone to hold your coat. I appreciate it, Reggie. I ended the call. A sense of profound calm washed over me. That was the comfort of true friendship, of a 50-year alliance. I didn't have to explain the years of disrespect. I didn't have to justify my feelings of anger and disappointment. I just had to state the problem, and he immediately began to architect the solution with me. It was a stark contrast to the painful, frustrating conversation with my own daughter. With Amara, I had to navigate a minefield of emotions and loyalties. With Reggie, it was a clean, straight line from problem to action. The first piece of the mechanism had clicked into place. The email with the legal document would be the foundation. Now it was time to build the walls. Kyle had demanded preparations, so preparations are what he would get. I am above all else a man who delivers on a promise. But the beauty of a promise is in the interpretation of the fine print. And I was about to become an expert in malicious compliance. My first stop was one of the guest bathrooms on the main floor. I ran my hand over the cool veined marble of the countertop. Imani had chosen this specific slab. She said it looked like the patterns the waves left on the sand at low tide. The towels hanging on the rack were thick plush and brilliant white. The room smelled faintly of lavender and sea salt from the custom-made soaps. I thought of Kyle and his 14 friends fresh from a long car ride expecting to shower in here to use these towels to stain this marble with their carelessness. A cold, hard resolve settled in my bones. They would not set foot in here. They would not profane this space. I took out my phone, went to the web browser, and typed in portable toilet rental Hilton Head. The first result was a company called Coastal Comfort Stations. Too pleasant. The second was Low Country Luxury Loos. Even worse. The third result was Perfect Grime Busters Portable Sanitation. It had the ring of industrial truth to it. I dialed the number. A man with a thick, gravelly voice answered on the second ring. Grime Busters. Hello, I said, my voice calm and professional. I'd like to arrange a rental for 3 portable sanitation units. All right, the man grunted. Location and duration. The address is 14 Ocean Spray Lane. I'll need them for a period of 3 weeks starting today. There was a pause. I heard him shuffling some papers. 14 Ocean Spray Lane. That's out on the point, isn't it? One of them big new villas? That is correct. Huh. All right. It's your money. Where on the property do you want them? I want them placed on the east side of the main garage. There is a manicured lawn there. Place them directly on the grass. You sure about that, mister? These things can sometimes leak. Might kill the grass. I am aware of the risks, I said coolly. That location will be the most convenient for my guests. I could almost feel his shrug through the phone. Okay. 3 units, 3 weeks. Delivery in about an hour. Sound good. Kyle's ETA was now under 40 minutes. I need them sooner. I'll pay an emergency delivery fee if necessary. I need them on my property in the next 30 minutes. He let out a low whistle. That's a tight turnaround. Gonna cost you. But we can do it. Anything else? Yes, I said. 2 things. First, I want to prepay for a daily cleaning and sanitation service, the most thorough one you offer. Second, what is your policy on emergency cleanup for overuse? He coughed a dry, rattling sound. We charge by the incident for that, sir. It ain't pretty. I understand, I said. Please, send over the agreement. I'll sign it digitally and pay immediately. I ended the call, and the signed contract was in my inbox less than 5 minutes later. I paid the exorbitant fee without a second thought. It was the best money I had spent all year. Step 1 was complete. The comfort station was arranged. Next on the list, food. Kyle's voice echoed in my mind. Prepare food. The entitlement in those 2 words was staggering. As if I were his personal chef, his servant, I walked into my kitchen. It was a chef's dream, an open-concept space with a 6-burner Wolf range, a Sub-Zero refrigerator that could hold a side of beef, and a custom-built island where Imani and I had spent countless hours drinking coffee and planning our future. I thought of the wonderful, elaborate meals we had hosted here. The smell of Imani's gumbo filling the air on Christmas Eve. The fresh grilled fish we'd served to friends on warm summer nights. This kitchen was a place of love, of nourishment, of community. It would not be used to feed a pack of vultures. I sat down at the island, opened my laptop, and searched for bulk industrial catering. I bypassed the first few results offering gourmet platters and artisan sandwiches. I scrolled down past the corporate lunch specialists until I found what I was looking for. The website was plain no frills with a name that was as honest as it was unappetizing. Site Servings Catering. Their slogan was "We Feed Crews." Their primary clients were construction sites, disaster relief teams, and large, low-budget institutional events. It was perfect. I called the number. A young woman with a bored, monotone voice answered. Site Servings. How can I help you? Hello, I said. I need to arrange a meal delivery service for 15 people for a duration of 21 days. Her voice perked up slightly at the size of the order. Okay, sir, we can certainly handle that. What menu package are you interested in? We have the Tuscan chicken, the tri-tip steak. No, I cut her off. I am interested in your most basic package. I believe on your website it's referred to as the Emergency Provision Pack. There was a stunned silence on the other end. Sir, she finally said, her voice laced with confusion. Are you sure that's our bare minimum option? It's designed for situations where a hot meal isn't possible. Please describe the contents for me, I said patiently. Well, she stammered, it's a bologna and American cheese sandwich on white bread, a small apple, and a 6-ounce bottle of water. That's it. Perfect, I said, a wave of grim satisfaction washing over me. That is exactly what I want. 15 units delivered twice a day for lunch and dinner for the next 21 days. But, sir, the cost difference is minimal to upgrade to our hot meal plan, she tried to reason. I am not interested in the hot meal plan, I said, my voice leaving no room for argument. I want the emergency provision pack. The first delivery needs to be here in 35 minutes for the dinner service. She was too bewildered to argue any further. Okay, sir. Whatever you want. I gave her my address and credit card information. As I read out the numbers, I glanced around my beautiful kitchen. I was ordering prison food to be delivered to a palace. The irony was exquisite. Finally, the sleeping arrangements. Prepare beds, towels, slippers. The audacity. I have 4 beautifully appointed guest bedrooms in this house. The beds are dressed in 800 thread count Egyptian cotton sheets. The closets contain plush robes and brand new slippers for my actual guests. The ensuite bathrooms are stocked with thick, fluffy towels. Kyle and his friends would not be sleeping in those rooms. They would not be using those towels. I had a large empty bonus room above the garage. It was originally intended to be a game room, but I hadn't furnished it yet. It had a durable hardwood floor and its own separate entrance. It would be their barracks. I made my final call not to a luxury linen store, but to a place downtown called Second Chance Liquidators, a massive warehouse that sold off old hotel and thrift store inventory. The manager, a man named Sal, sounded like he'd seen it all. I have an unusual request, I began. "Try me," he said, his voice weary. "I need to purchase today 15 sets of your cheapest, most mismatched towels. The thinner and more threadbare the better. Same for pillows and blankets. I don't care about color, style, or condition as long as they are technically clean." Sal was quiet for a moment. "Son," he said, and I had to smile at being called son at my age. "Are you starting a homeless shelter or outfitting a horror movie?" "Something in between," I replied. "It's for a group of young men who desperately need to learn the value of things." Sal laughed a loud, booming sound. "Say no more! I got a whole pallet of old towels from a motel that went under. They're about as absorbent as a plastic bag. And the pillows have all the fluff of a pancake. I can have a truck bring the whole lot over to you this afternoon." "Perfect," I said. "Leave the boxes in the garage. I'll handle them from there." As I hung up, my work was done. The legal trap was set. The sanitation, the sustenance, and the sleeping quarters were arranged. Each step was a direct, literal response to my son-in-law's demands. He had treated me like a servant, so I had prepared his accommodations with the detached, impersonal efficiency of one. He and his friends were expecting a free vacation at a luxury resort. They were about to discover they had booked a 3-week stay at a minimalist boot camp. And I, Theodore Beaumont, would be their drill sergeant. With the foundation of my plan now solid, my mind turned to the final crucial element. It wasn't enough to simply deny Kyle the luxury he felt entitled to. That was a lesson in boundaries. I needed to teach him a lesson in consequences. I needed to dismantle the facade he presented to the world, and I needed to do it in front of someone who mattered to his future. My mind drifted back about a month ago. I had been at Amara and Kyle's house for dinner. Kyle had spent most of the evening on his phone, pacing around the living room, speaking in that overly loud, artificially confident voice he used when he was trying to impress someone. He was trying to land a big real estate investment deal, and he kept dropping the investor's name like a status symbol, Sterling Harrison. "Sterling and I see eye to eye on this," he'd bragged to someone on the phone. "He trusts my instincts." I remember thinking at the time that Kyle's only instinct was for self-preservation, but I had filed the name away. An engineer never throws out a potentially useful piece of data. I sat down at my desk, the cherry wood cool and solid beneath my forearms, and opened my laptop. I didn't just search for Sterling Harrison. That was an amateur's move. I started with what I knew: Sterling Harrison Atlanta Investments. The first few results gave me the basics: CEO of Harrison Capital, a private equity firm with a portfolio that was both massive and discreet. He was a shark, a man who had built an empire. A man like that wouldn't be impressed by Kyle's cheap bravado. He would see right through it. A direct approach, a business approach, was too risky. Kyle could spin it as a professional disagreement. I needed a different angle. I needed to find the man behind the CEO. I dug deeper. I searched for board memberships, university affiliations, and public appearances. It took me 45 minutes of methodical searching, cross-referencing articles from the Atlanta Business Chronicle with society pages and university alumni newsletters. And then I found it. The key. Sterling Harrison was the chairman of the Harrison Foundation, a nonprofit he had founded in his late wife's name. Its mission was to provide scholarships and mentorship opportunities to underprivileged high school students who wanted to pursue careers in science, technology, engineering, and math. STEM, my world. My entire life had been built on the principles of engineering. It was a cause I genuinely deeply cared about. It was the perfect leverage because it was based on a truth. This was no longer just a trap for Kyle. It was an opportunity. I found the direct number for the foundation's administrative office. It was time to place the final load-bearing beam into my construction. I took a deep breath, composed myself, and dialed. A polite, professional woman answered. "Harrison Foundation, this is Carol speaking." "Hello, Carol," I said, my voice calm and measured. "My name is Theodore Beaumont. I was hoping I might be able to leave a message for Mr. Harrison's executive assistant. I can certainly connect you to his office, sir. May I ask the nature of your call?" "Of course," I said. "I'm a retired civil engineer. My firm was Beaumont Structural, based out of Atlanta. I have been following the excellent work of the Harrison Foundation for some time, particularly its focus on engineering scholarships. As someone who has benefited greatly from a career in the field, I am considering making a significant personal contribution to support the next generation." I let that hang in the air for a moment. The words were carefully chosen and entirely true. I was considering it. The woman's tone immediately became warmer, more accommodating. "That's wonderful to hear, Mr. Beaumont. One moment, please. I'll put you right through to Mr. Harrison's assistant, Elizabeth." A moment later, a new voice, sharp and efficient, came on the line. "Elizabeth speaking. How may I help you?" I repeated my introduction and my purpose. I could hear her typing as I spoke. "Mr. Beaumont, I see your firm's name here. Very distinguished. Mr. Harrison is always pleased to hear from industry leaders who share his passion for the foundation. He's traveling at the moment, but I can certainly schedule a call for you next week." "I appreciate that, Elizabeth," I said smoothly. "However, I have a slightly more timely proposal. I am currently at my property on Hilton Head for the weekend. I know this is last minute, but I was wondering if Mr. Harrison might have a few hours free tomorrow afternoon. He could join me here. We could discuss the foundation's long-term goals, and I could learn more about where my contribution could be most effective. And, of course, enjoy the ocean view." It was a bold move, but it was calculated. It was an invitation not to an office, but to a private, exclusive setting. It spoke of peer-to-peer respect, not of a supplicant asking for a meeting. I was offering him an opportunity, not just asking for his time. There was a pause. "That is an unusual request, Mr. Beaumont. Mr. Harrison's weekend schedule is typically private." "I understand completely," I said, my tone unchanging. "Please simply extend the invitation. If it's not possible, I'll be happy to schedule a call for next week. My potential contribution will, of course, remain the same." I had laid the final card on the table. The decision was his. She said she would pass along the message. We ended the call. I closed my laptop. All the pieces were now in motion. All the materials had been ordered and were on their way. The legal framework was in my inbox, and the surprise witness had been invited. I had designed the structure. All I had to do now was wait for the storm to arrive and see how well it held. The clock on my study wall chimed 4 p.m. Outside, the world was bathed in the gentle golden light of a late coastal afternoon. Inside, a different kind of time was being kept, a countdown. I had received a text notification 15 minutes prior. The portable sanitation units had been delivered and placed as instructed on the far side of the garage, hidden from the initial view of the driveway. 10 minutes after that, another notification. The boxed lunches, the first of 42 scheduled deliveries, had been left on a pallet inside the open garage. I had taken a moment to inspect one. The white bread was spongy, the single slice of bologna was pale, and the apple was small and slightly bruised. It was perfectly depressingly adequate. Everything was in place. I walked out to the front porch, the veranda that wrapped around the front of the house, offering a commanding view of the long, crushed shell driveway. I didn't sit in one of the comfortable rocking chairs. Instead, I moved the small, sturdy mahogany table from the entryway and placed it in the center of the porch. I placed a single firm office chair behind it. On the table, I set down 2 items: the leather-bound clipboard containing the rental agreement Reggie had sent and the sleek black credit card terminal I had retrieved from my home office. Then I sat, and I waited. I didn't have to wait long. At first, it was a low, distant thrumming, a vibration I felt more than heard. It was the sound of cheap aftermarket mufflers and the percussive thump of bass-heavy music. It grew steadily louder, an approaching infection on the quiet air of the island. Then they came into view. It wasn't just a car. It was a convoy of chaos. A lifted Ford F-150 with tires far too large for its frame led the charge, followed by a slightly battered-looking BMW that was probably leased, and finally a dusty SUV with a cracked taillight. They didn't slow down as they entered the driveway. They sped up, sending shells scattering onto my immaculate lawn. They screeched to a halt in a haphazard formation, engines revving needlessly before finally cutting out, leaving behind a ringing silence that was immediately shattered by shouting and raucous laughter. Doors flew open and they spilled out. 15 of them, a tidal wave of cheap cologne, loud voices, and unearned confidence. They were a caricature of modern masculinity clad in brand-name athletic wear and backward-facing baseball caps. One of them immediately cracked open a beer and, after taking a long swallow, tossed the empty can onto the pristine grass beside the driveway. It landed with a soft metallic clink. I watched the can glinting in the sun against the perfect green, and I felt a flicker of pure, hot rage. I took a slow, deep breath, and the rage subsided, replaced by the cold, hard weight of my purpose. This single casual act of disrespect had confirmed everything. They saw this place not as a home, but as a venue, a commodity to be consumed. Kyle was in the center of it all, playing the role of the magnanimous host. He clapped one of his friends on the back, gesturing expansively at the villa, his chest puffed out with pride that was entirely unearned. See, his voice carried clearly across the lawn. "What did I tell you guys, my father-in-law's little beach shack? Not bad, huh? Wait till you see the inside." He started walking toward the house, his friends trailing behind him like a pack of hyenas, their eyes scanning the property, their voices a cacophony of whoops and hollers. They were loud, obnoxious, and utterly oblivious. They were walking up the wide, welcoming stone steps of my front porch, but they were not guests. They were invaders. I remained seated, my posture perfect, my hands resting calmly on the table in front of me. I did not stand. I did not smile. I simply watched them come. As Kyle reached the top step, he finally saw me. He stopped short. The triumphant smirk on his face flickered, replaced by a momentary flash of confusion. His brain, which had been anticipating an open door and a fawning welcome, was struggling to process the scene before him. Me, the office chair, the formal table blocking the main entrance, and the two objects sitting upon it. His eyes darted from my face to the clipboard to the black, unfamiliar shape of the credit card terminal. I saw the exact moment the confusion began to curdle into unease. His friends, sensing the sudden shift in energy, quieted down behind him, their laughter dying in their throats. The confident swagger in their approach faltered. They were no longer a conquering army, but a confused crowd shuffling awkwardly to a halt. The silence that fell was thick with questions they didn't know how to ask. Kyle stared at the credit card machine as if it were a venomous snake. I slowly lifted my head, my eyes meeting his. I offered no warmth, no recognition. I looked at him as a landlord would look at a new, potentially troublesome tenant. My voice when I finally spoke was not loud, but it cut through the silence with the clean, sharp edge of a surgeon's scalpel. "Gentlemen," I said, my gaze sweeping over the entire bewildered group. "Welcome to the Beaumont Villa. I trust you had a pleasant journey." I paused, letting the formality of my words sink in. "We have some paperwork to go through before you can check in." Kyle stared at me, his mouth slightly agape. The cogs in his brain were turning, trying to reconcile the fantasy in his head with the reality sitting before him. He blinked as if trying to clear a bad image from his vision. "Check in," he finally stammered, forcing a laugh that sounded more like a cough. "What is this, Theo? Some kind of weird joke?" "Very funny, old man. Now, are you going to move this table, or do we have to do it for you?" He took a step forward, reaching for the edge of the mahogany table, but I didn't flinch. I simply raised a hand, a calm, commanding gesture that stopped him in his tracks. "I assure you, Kyle, I am not joking," I said, my voice level and devoid of emotion. "This property operates as a private residence. You are not my invited guests. You are at best prospective tenants. Therefore, your stay here is conditional upon your agreement to the terms and conditions outlined in this document." I tapped a single long finger on the clipboard. "It's a standard short-term lease agreement. I'm sure you and your friends will find the terms quite reasonable." A wave of murmuring rippled through the group of friends behind him. I could see them exchanging confused, uneasy glances. This was not the welcome they had been promised. Kyle's face began to flush, a deep, blotchy red that started at his neck and crept up to his temples. "A lease agreement." He spat the words out, his voice rising in volume and pitch. "Are you insane? I'm your son-in-law. This is Amara's father's house. It's family property." "You are mistaken on several points," I countered, my voice as calm as his was agitated. "First, you are my daughter's husband. That is a relationship, not a title deed. Second, this is my house purchased with my money earned over a lifetime of work. Your name appears nowhere on the title. Therefore, it is my property, not family property. As the sole owner, I set the rules. And the first rule is everyone pays their own way." I pushed the clipboard and the credit card terminal a few inches toward him across the table. "Now, if you'd like to proceed, we can go over the terms." His eyes bulged. He looked from the clipboard to my face, searching for a crack in my composure, a hint of weakness. He found none. He was a bully, and a bully's primary weapon is intimidation. But intimidation only works on the timid, and I have spent my life staring down contractors who were trying to cut corners, city officials who were trying to delay projects, and the unyielding laws of physics themselves. A spoiled, entitled man-child was nothing. "This is unbelievable," he said, shaking his head and turning to his friends, seeking an alliance. "He's actually trying to charge us, my own father-in-law." Some of his friends shuffled their feet, looking at the ground. A few looked amused, as if this were some strange family drama they had front row seats for, but none of them looked supportive. They had come for a free ride, not to be pawns in a domestic dispute. Their silence seemed to fuel Kyle's rage. He turned back to me, his fists clenched. "Fine," he yelled. "Fine. What are the damn terms? Let's hear them." "Certainly," I said, picking up the clipboard. I didn't read directly from the page, but recited the key points from memory, my eyes fixed on his. The rental fee is $200 per person per night. For 15 individuals over a period of 21 nights, that comes to a total of $63,000 payable in advance. A collective gasp went through the crowd. One of the friends in the back actually laughed out loud, a sharp, incredulous bark. Kyle's face went from red to a pale, sickly white. He looked like I had just punched him in the gut. $63,000, he whispered, his voice cracking. "You're joking. That is the market rate for a property of this size and location," I stated flatly. "I am also required to collect a $10,000 security deposit to cover any potential damages or excessive cleaning fees. The deposit is, of course, refundable pending a satisfactory inspection upon your departure." I let the numbers hang in the air, each one a hammer blow against his inflated ego. Furthermore, I continued, not giving him a chance to recover. "The agreement stipulates the designated living and service areas for your party. Your sleeping quarters will be the unfurnished bonus room above the garage. Bedding and towels have been provided and are located in the garage. Your designated dining area is the garage, where your prepaid meal service will be delivered twice daily. And your designated sanitation facilities are the 3 portable units located on the east lawn. Use of any other room or facility in the main house, including all bathrooms, the kitchen, and the swimming pool, is strictly prohibited and will result in forfeiture of your entire security deposit and immediate eviction." The humiliation was now palpable. It hung in the air, thick and suffocating. I wasn't just charging him. I was classifying him. I was assigning him to the servants' quarters. I was telling him in the clearest possible terms that he and his friends were not welcome in my home. They were an infestation to be contained. The friend who had laughed earlier was now trying and failing to hide his smirk. Others were looking at Kyle with a new expression, pity. The leader of their fun-filled vacation was being systematically dismantled in front of them by a calm 71-year-old man. Kyle's hands were trembling with rage. He was a cornered animal, stripped of his power and his pride. You can't do this," he stammered, his voice a hoarse whisper. This is crazy. I'm calling Amara. She'll put a stop to this." "Feel free," I said, gesturing with an open hand. "Call her. Explain to your wife why you attempted to bring 14 strangers into her father's home for a 3-week party without so much as a polite request. Explain to her that your response to being presented with a bill for your own vacation was to throw a tantrum on my front porch. By all means, let her know exactly what kind of man she married. That was the final blow. He knew, and I knew, that Amara would not save him. She would be mortified. She would retreat into apologies and silence, leaving him to face the consequences he had created. He had no allies. He had no leverage. He only had his rage. And it exploded. "You old bastard," he screamed, his voice raw. He lunged forward and slammed both hands down on the mahogany table. The credit card terminal jumped. The clipboard skittered to the side. But I did not move. I did not even blink. I just looked at him, my expression one of clinical disappointment. "I think this meeting is over," I said, my voice dropping to a low, dangerous calm. "You have clearly indicated that you have no intention of complying with the terms of tenancy. I am therefore rescinding the offer. You and your associates have 5 minutes to vacate my property. If you are not gone by then, I will be forced to call the sheriff's department and have you removed for trespassing." The word trespassing hung in the air, cold and sharp and legally binding. The fun was over. The party was canceled. All that was left was the long, humiliating drive home with 14 witnesses to his epic failure. Just as the word trespassing left my lips, a new voice cut through the tense air, a voice I knew better than my own. "Dad, stop it." "What in God's name are you doing, Amara?" She must have been waiting in one of the cars, likely hoping this whole situation would resolve itself without her intervention. But the time for waiting was over. She rushed up the steps, her face pale with a mixture of horror and embarrassment. Her eyes darted from me to her husband to the crowd of silent watching friends. Her primary concern, as always, was the spectacle. "Everyone is watching," she pleaded in a hushed, urgent whisper. Please, can we just handle this inside?" Kyle saw her as his last line of defense, his only remaining ally. A surge of desperate hope flashed in his eyes. "Amara, thank God," he exclaimed, grabbing her arm. "Tell your father he's lost his mind. He's trying to kick us out." He presented me with a $60,000 bill. He tried to frame it as the ramblings of a senile old man, a ridiculous fantasy. I ignored him completely. I didn't even glance in his direction. My focus was entirely on my daughter. I looked at her not with anger, but with a profound and heavy sadness. My voice when I spoke was quiet, meant for her ears only, though everyone on that porch strained to hear it. "Amara, I am doing what should have been done a long, long time ago. I am setting a boundary." "A boundary," she shot back, her voice trembling. "This isn't a boundary. Dad, this is a public execution, a rental agreement, portable toilets. It's cruel. It's meant to humiliate him." Her words were a desperate attempt to paint me as the villain, to reframe the narrative in a way that would absolve her and her husband of their own actions. "I would not allow it. Cruel." I repeated the word softly, letting it hang in the air. "Let me tell you what is cruel, Amara. Cruel is when your husband, a man I welcomed into my family, calls me on the phone and doesn't greet me but instead makes demands. Cruel is when he orders me, the man who raised you, to hurry up and prepare my own home for his party like a common servant." I took a step closer to her, my voice never rising yet. Each word landed with the force of a hammer blow. "Cruel is him thinking he has the right to bring a horde of disrespectful strangers into the home that your mother and I dreamed of, our entire lives, a home we built with 50 years of sweat and sacrifice. And perhaps the cruelest thing of all, Amara, is you standing by silently while he does it." Tears welled in her eyes. She looked from my face to her husband's, who was standing there, his mouth agape, utterly exposed. "You call this humiliation?" I continued, my voice softening with the weight of my disappointment. "I call it a lesson in basic arithmetic. It is a lesson that actions have direct and equal consequences. Your husband wanted to treat this sacred place like a cheap motel, so I have simply provided him with the appropriate level of service. No more, no less. I am a logical man, Amara. This is a logical solution." I gestured around us at the beautiful facade of the house, the sweeping ocean view. "Your mother dreamed of this house as a sanctuary, a place of peace, of love, of respect. Look at what he has brought to her doorstep. He has brought noise and entitlement and greed. Is this the legacy you want for her? Is this the example you want to set for your own future children, that it's okay to take and never give anything back, not even a shred of common decency?" She had no answer. She simply stood there, caught in the crossfire between the man she had married and the undeniable truth her father had just laid bare. She looked at Kyle, really looked at him perhaps for the first time without the filter of her desire to keep the peace. She saw him not as her charming, ambitious husband, but as I saw him, a spoiled, petulant boy, furious that his favorite toy had been taken away. Her silence was the loudest sound on the porch. It was the sound of an illusion shattering. Kyle saw it too. He saw the flicker of doubt in her eyes, the crumbling of her unconditional support. And in that moment he knew he had lost. The silence that followed my words was the most profound I had ever heard. It was a vacuum pulling all the air and noise from the porch. Kyle stood frozen, his face a mask of disbelief and fury. He had lost, and he knew it. He had lost the argument, he had lost the respect of his friends, and most importantly, he had lost the unconditional shield of my daughter's support. Amara's inability to defend him was a verdict more damning than any I could have delivered. He was alone, exposed, and simmering with a rage that had nowhere left to go. His friends began to shuffle backwards, creating a physical distance between themselves and his failure. They were no longer part of his entourage, they were just spectators at his public execution. He opened his mouth perhaps to scream, perhaps to curse me, perhaps to beg. But whatever words he intended to say were swallowed by a new sound. It was not a loud sound. It was the quiet, confident purr of a finely tuned German engine, a sound that spoke of wealth and precision. It was the sound of power arriving. A gleaming black Mercedes S-Class, looking like a polished obsidian stone, glided silently up my driveway. It didn't speed or swerve. It moved with an unhurried grace that made the other cars look like cheap, clumsy toys. It came to a perfect stop behind the chaotic cluster of Kyle's vehicles, its presence instantly changing the entire atmosphere of the property. The chauffeur's door opened and a man in a simple black suit got out. He walked around to the passenger side and opened the rear door. Sterling Harrison emerged. He was exactly as I had imagined from my research. Around 60 tall and lean with a full head of silver hair impeccably styled. He wore a cream-colored linen suit that probably cost more than Kyle's monthly salary and shoes that shone even in the afternoon shade. He didn't look around with curiosity. His gaze was sharp, analytical, sweeping over the scene with the cool appraisal of a man accustomed to assessing situations and people in an instant. I watched him, and I imagined what he was seeing. I, the architect of this scene, could now appreciate it from the perspective of my most important audience member. He would have first noticed the cars parked haphazardly, one of them halfway on my lawn, an immediate sign of disrespect and a lack of discipline. His own car, by contrast, was a statement of order and control. Then his eyes would have landed on the crowd of young men. He would have seen their cheap athletic wear, their stunned, foolish expressions, their awkward posture as they tried to pretend they weren't there. He would have categorized them in a second: followers, not leaders. Parasites. Then his sharp gaze would have caught the most jarring detail of all, the one that defied all logic for a property like this. The 3 bright blue portable sanitation units standing absurdly on the edge of my perfectly manicured lawn. A man like Harrison, a man who deals in assets and liabilities, would have understood immediately. Those units were not a sign of a party. They were a sign of a quarantine, a containment strategy. It was a detail so bizarre, so out of place, that it told a story all on its own. Finally, his gaze would have settled on the tableau vivant on the porch, the central drama. He would have seen a young man, my son-in-law, his face contorted in a mask of impotent rage, his body language screaming of a loss of control. He would have seen a young woman, my daughter, standing to the side, her face streaked with tears, a portrait of shame and heartbreak. And then he would have seen me. An elderly black man, standing calm and composed, dressed simply but with dignity, holding a clipboard. In a scene of emotional chaos, I was the single point of stillness. Harrison, a man whose entire life was about identifying the power player in any room, would have made his assessment in less than a heartbeat. He would have known instantly who was in charge. He closed his car door with a soft, expensive click that seemed to echo in the sudden silence. He began to walk toward the porch, his movements deliberate, his gaze sweeping over everything, missing nothing. He didn't look angry or shocked. His expression was far worse. It was one of mild clinical interest, the look of a biologist examining a flawed specimen under a microscope. Kyle saw him coming. All the color drained from his face. The rage vanished, replaced by a pure animal terror. This wasn't his beer-guzzling friend Chad or his yes-man Brad. This was Sterling Harrison, the man he had been boasting about for months, the man who held the key to the business deal that was supposed to make him rich, that was supposed to prove to everyone, to me, to Amara, that he was a success. And that man was now walking toward a scene of his complete and utter humiliation. The silence on the porch was absolute. The only sound was the gentle crunch of Harrison's expensive leather shoes on the crushed shells of my driveway, each step a countdown to Kyle's final spectacular implosion. Sterling Harrison reached the bottom of the stone steps, his cool, assessing gaze finally locking with Kyle's terrified one. The silence that had fallen over the porch was absolute, broken only by the distant cry of a gull and the rhythmic sigh of the ocean. Kyle was a statue of pure panic, his face as white as the sea foam. The bully had finally met a predator, and his instincts screamed at him to flee, but he was frozen in place. I decided it was time to break the spell. With a calm that I did not entirely feel but had perfected over a lifetime of high-stakes negotiations, I stepped past my son-in-law as if he were nothing more than a piece of garden furniture. I descended the 2 short steps and extended my hand to my guest. "Sterling, I'm so glad you could make it," I said, my voice warm and welcoming. "Theodore Beaumont." Harrison took my hand. His grip was firm, dry, and confident. He was a man who had shaken thousands of hands and could likely tell a man's entire life story from the strength of his grip. "Theodore, the pleasure is all mine," he replied, his voice a smooth, cultured baritone. His eyes briefly left mine to scan the facade of the villa. "I must say your property is even more impressive in person, a testament to fine design." "Thank you," I said. It was a labor of love for my late wife and me. I then gestured vaguely with my free hand toward the chaotic scene on the porch. "Please forgive the unusual welcome party." We seem to be having a slight issue with some uninvited short-term tenants. I was just going over the house rules. I chose the words with surgical precision. Uninvited. Tenants. Each word was a perfectly aimed dart puncturing Kyle's entire fabricated reality. The sound that escaped Kyle's throat was a strangled gasp. He saw his one chance, his only chance to salvage the situation. He lurched forward, his hands held up in a pleading gesture. "Mr. Harrison." "Sir," he sputtered, his voice cracking with desperation. I can explain. This is a family misunderstanding. A practical joke. My father-in-law, Theo, he has a very strange sense of humor. It was a pathetic attempt, a desperate lie that was so flimsy it was almost insulting." Harrison turned his head slowly to look at Kyle. He didn't look angry. He didn't look amused. He looked at him with the cold, detached curiosity of a scientist observing a particularly uninteresting insect. He said nothing. He simply held Kyle's gaze for a long, excruciating moment before turning back to me, his expression unchanged. That single, silent dismissal was more brutal than any verbal rebuke. It told Kyle and everyone watching that he was not important enough to even address. He was an irrelevance. I decided it was time to deliver the final killing blow. I feigned a look of pleasant surprise. "Ah," I said, allowing a slight, friendly smile to touch my lips. "So, you two already know each other? Wonderful. It seems I'm the one who is out of the loop." I turned my body slightly, positioning myself as the gracious host making introductions. "Sterling, allow me to properly introduce my son-in-law, Kyle Miller." Kyle flinched as if I had struck him. Harrison's gaze remained fixed on me, waiting for the rest of the story. Kyle was just telling his friends, I continued, my voice smooth as silk, all about the family villa, and how he was planning to host you here for the weekend. I believe he was hoping to impress you, to show you the kind of assets at his disposal. A commendable, if rather misguided, ambition. The words hung in the air, each one a nail in the coffin of Kyle's credibility. I had exposed his lie, his motive, and his foolishness, all while maintaining the polite fiction of a family introduction. I let the silence stretch for a moment, allowing the full weight of the humiliation to settle onto Kyle's shoulders. His friends were now actively trying to disappear, some inching backwards toward their cars, others staring intently at their shoes. Amara had her hand over her mouth, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Then I turned back to Harrison, my expression now one of mild professional concern. "Unfortunately," I said, my voice dropping into a more confidential tone in his excitement, "my son-in-law seems to have forgotten a few minor details, such as the fact that he is not in fact the host of this gathering, and that his name does not appear on the property deed, and that his very generous invitation to you was extended without the owner's knowledge or consent." I looked Sterling Harrison directly in the eye, a fellow man of structure, of rules, of consequences. A rather significant oversight in the world of business, wouldn't you agree? Sterling Harrison's gaze finally shifted from me to Kyle. He looked him up and down, a slow, deliberate appraisal that stripped Kyle bare of any remaining dignity. When he spoke, his voice was as cold and sharp as splintered ice. "Miller," he said, the name sounding like a curse. "In my world, we have a name for people who use assets they don't own to leverage deals they can't close. We call them frauds." He took a half-step closer to the porch, his presence radiating an aura of absolute authority. "We do not do business with frauds. We do not invest in them. We do not associate with them. And we certainly," he added, his voice dropping even lower, "do not accept invitations from them to homes that are not theirs. It shows a fundamental lack of character. It shows a fatal lack of judgment." He paused, letting the verdict sink in. "Our meeting on Monday is canceled. In fact, all future meetings are canceled. Do not contact my office again." It was an execution delivered with the clean, impersonal efficiency of a guillotine. Every hope Kyle had, every lie he had built, every ounce of bravado he possessed was severed in that single brutal moment. He was finished, and everyone on that porch knew it. Harrison's words fell like stones into a deep, silent well. The finality of them, the absolute and irrevocable judgment, seemed to suck all the remaining air from the porch. Kyle didn't move. He didn't speak. He just stood there, swaying slightly, a hollowed-out shell of the arrogant man who had arrived less than an hour ago. The spell was broken. The spectacle was over. And the rat, sensing the ship was not only sinking, but had already hit the ocean floor, began to desert. It started with one of them, a tall kid in a ridiculously oversized sports jersey. He avoided looking at anyone, especially Kyle, and with a mumbled excuse that nobody could hear, he turned and walked quickly toward the big pickup truck. That single act broke the dam. Another one followed, then two more, a silent mutual agreement passing between them. There were no claps on the shoulder, no words of commiseration for their fallen leader. They simply turned their backs on him. Their loyalty, it was now clear, had been entirely transactional. They were there for the promise of a 3-week party in a multi-million-dollar villa. They were there for the free food, the free lodging, the status they could borrow from being associated with a place like this. But they were not there for Kyle. Now that the promise had evaporated, their allegiance vanished with it. They scurried back to their cars, their movements hurried and awkward like thieves caught in the act. They fumbled with their keys, started their engines with loud, unapologetic roars, and peeled out of my driveway one by one, scattering gravel in their haste to escape the toxic cloud of humiliation that hung over their friend. Within 90 seconds, they were all gone. All that remained of their boisterous arrival was a single empty beer can lying on its side in my perfect grass. Throughout this mass exodus, Sterling Harrison had not moved. He watched the pathetic retreat with an expression of mild distaste, as if he had just witnessed a rather unpleasant but entirely predictable phenomenon. When the last car had disappeared down the road, he turned his attention back to me, and his demeanor shifted instantly. The cold contempt was gone, replaced by an air of professional respect. "Theodore," he said, extending his hand once more. "My sincere apologies for that intrusion. It seems I was brought here under entirely false pretenses." I took his hand. "Not at all, Sterling," I replied, my voice calm. "In a way, your visit was perfectly timed. It brought a necessary clarity to the situation, a flicker of understanding of mutual respect between two men who understood the importance of clarity passed between us. The offer to discuss your foundation still stands, of course," I added, perhaps at a more appropriate moment. "I would like that very much," he said with a nod. "I have a feeling you and I will have a great deal to discuss. Character is the best collateral for any investment, and you have shown it in abundance. I'll have my assistant Elizabeth call you on Monday morning to arrange a proper meeting." With that, he gave a final dismissive glance in the direction of Kyle, a look one might give to a piece of trash on the sidewalk before turning and walking back to his waiting Mercedes. His chauffeur held the door and he slid inside. The car purred to life and glided away as silently and gracefully as it had arrived, leaving behind only the lingering scent of expensive leather and absolute power. And then there was only one left. Kyle stood alone on the lawn, a solitary figure in the wreckage of his own making. The bravado, the arrogance, the entitlement, it had all been stripped away, leaving behind something small, pathetic, and utterly broken. He looked at the empty driveway where his friends had been. He looked at the magnificent house he would never enter. He looked at Amara, who stood by the porch railing, her face a mask of sorrow and disillusionment. And finally his eyes met mine. There was no anger left in them. There was no defiance. There was only the vast, empty shame of a man who had gambled everything on a lie and lost it all in front of the entire world. With the departure of the last car, a heavy, unnatural silence descended upon the property. The sounds of the ocean, which had been drowned out by the chaos, returned to the forefront, a steady, indifferent rhythm against the shore. Kyle remained a statue on the lawn, a man marooned on an island of his own making. He was the only piece of wreckage left behind by the storm. I stayed on the porch, watching him, feeling not triumph, but a deep, aching sorrow. This was the result of a sickness I had allowed to fester for far too long. This was the cost of confusing peace with silence. I looked over at my daughter. Amara was still standing by the railing, her back to me, looking out at the water. Her shoulders were no longer shaking. The tears had stopped. When she finally turned around, I saw a change in her that startled me. The fear, the embarrassment, the desperate need to smooth things over it was all gone. In its place was a quiet, sad resolve that I hadn't seen in her eyes since she was a little girl, the kind of resolve she used to have before the world taught her to be accommodating, before Kyle taught her that his happiness was more important than her own. She looked like her mother. She walked with a steady, unhurried grace down the steps and onto the lawn, stopping a few feet in front of her husband. Kyle looked up at her, his face a mess of confusion and hope. He saw her coming toward him, and even after everything that had just happened, a pathetic flicker of expectation ignited in his eyes. He thought she was coming to comfort him, to fix it, to tell him they would get through this together. He thought she was going to choose him. "Amara," he whispered, his voice hoarse. "Baby, can you believe what he did to us? To me?" Amara looked at him, her expression unreadable for a moment, and then she shook her head slowly. "No, Kyle," she said, and her voice was clearer and stronger than I had heard it in years. "I can't believe what I did. I can't believe I let it get to this point." Kyle recoiled as if she had slapped him. She was not taking his side. She was taking responsibility. "I spent so many years making excuses for you," she continued, her voice never wavering. "Your ambition, I called it. Your inappropriate sense of humor. Your disrespect toward my father. I told myself I was keeping the peace, that I was being a good, supportive wife. But I wasn't. I was just being a coward. I was helping you build a cage for both of us, a cage made of lies and entitlement." As she spoke, she raised her left hand. Slowly, with a deliberate and final motion, she twisted the diamond wedding ring on her finger. The stone caught the last rays of the setting sun, flashing with a brilliant, cold light. She pulled it off, her movements fluid and decisive. She held it in the palm of her hand, the small, heavy object that had once symbolized a promise but had become a symbol of her submission. She held it out to him. "My father taught me something today, Kyle," she said, her eyes locking with his. "He taught me what a boundary looks like. He taught me what it means to protect the things you truly love. I love his home. I love my mother's memory. And I am finally learning how to love myself enough to know that I deserve more than this. I deserve respect. We all do." Kyle just stared at the ring in her hand, his mouth opening and closing silently. He had no words. His entire arsenal of bluster and manipulation was useless against this new, calm version of his wife. "It's over, Kyle," she said softly, but with the unyielding finality of a closing door. "Go home, or whatever place you call home now." She didn't wait for an answer. She simply placed the ring in his trembling, outstretched hand, turned around and walked back toward me, leaving him standing there alone with the wreckage of their marriage in his palm. As Kyle's car disappeared down the long driveway, Amara slowly walked up the steps and quietly sat in the rocking chair next to mine. We didn't speak for a long time. There was nothing left to say. The battle was over. We just sat there together, father and daughter, watching the sky bleed from gold into a deep, tranquil purple. The only sounds were the gentle lapping of the waves on the shore and the rhythmic creak of our chairs. After a while, she stood up, walked down onto the lawn, and picked up the single beer can that lay gleaming in the twilight. She disposed of it in the recycling bin by the garage and returned to her seat. The cleansing was complete. Peace had been restored. I looked at the empty space on the lawn where all the chaos had been, and then I looked at my daughter, her face calm and composed in the fading light. There was no joy in what had happened today, no thrill of victory. There was only the grim satisfaction of a necessary job well done. My wife Amani had always told me that you build a house with concrete and steel, but you build a home with respect. For years, I had allowed the foundation of our home to be chipped away, crack by crack, all in the name of a false peace. Today's conflict wasn't a celebration. It was a demolition. It was the painful, noisy but necessary tearing down of an unstable structure built on a foundation of lies. I hadn't kicked a man out of my house. I had simply protected the integrity of my home. And now, sitting here with my daughter in the quiet evening, listening to the sound of the ocean, I knew that on this cleared ground, on this strong and solid foundation, we could finally begin to build again. This experience taught me a valuable lesson at 71 years old. For too long, I believed that keeping the peace meant absorbing disrespect in silence. I was wrong. True peace is not the absence of conflict, but the presence of justice and firm boundaries. A family is like any structure I have ever built. Its integrity depends on the strength of its foundation. That foundation is not blood, but mutual respect. Sometimes the most loving act is not to tolerate but to correct, ensuring that the legacy you have built will stand strong for generations to come. It is never too late to enforce the blueprint of your own life. Now I turn it over to you. Have you ever had to draw a hard line with a family member who took your kindness for weakness?